say you wanna watch a drama. You say you wanna watch a comedy. Well, you can watch it with your mama, or you can watch it with your daddy.
You'll even sit and watch it with your middle schooler, so you can come and talk around a water cooler. We're watching all day and all night.
Couch potatoes unite.
Whoa, whoa.
Couch potatoes unite.
Whoa, whoa. Couch potatoes unite.
Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of the podcast entitled Couch Potatoes Unite! Which is based on a blog of the same name. Because if a popular concept can transfer from film to television, why can't it morph from printed to spoken word? That's not even a rhetorical joke, I'm asking the question. I am the blogger in question and the self-styled chief couch potato. My name is Kylie and I love TV. If you feel the same, keep listening and or checking out our website, couchpotatoesunite.wordpress.com, as you're bound to find some common ground or something you like. For Couch Potatoes Unite, we're all about the wonders and the unique long-form storytelling of the small screen. CPU, ! Hopes you've been following releases of brand new episodes of the podcast on Wednesdays, as well as new blog entries on some Tuesdays, and as always we have several more new episodes on the way. Because the panelists and I live lives behind our podcast, the episodes are published once per week. Subscribe to the blog or the podcast via iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, via Google Play, Spotify, and on iHeartRadio to stay on top of brand new episodes. Episodes already published discuss a variety of shows around the water cooler, including, but not limited to, Supernatural, Orange is the New Black, Gotham, the Marvel shows on Netflix, Stranger Things, The Good Place, and iZombie. Plus, new episodes are in the works, including revisits for The Crown, Altered Carbon, Doctor Who, Schitt's Creek, Westworld, Fuller House, Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt. We'll be launching new panels covering Outlander, the Breaking Bad universe, This Is Us, and the Orville. And because we look back at shows now past, we'll consider the moral implications and quick cancellation of Dollhouse, and we'll travel through time and experience all sorts of identities with Quantum Leap. By the way, did you know that CPU also from time to time goes live? We've been live from bunkers, comedy shows, Comic-Cons, and game stores. Plus, we're planning more live appearances and other cool stuff, including in quarantine times. So make sure you like or follow us at our Facebook page, our Twitter at CPU Podcast, our Instagram at Couch Potatoes Unite, or subscribe to our website, our YouTube channel, our Apple iTunes channel, our Stitcher Radio channel, or find us on Google Play, on Spotify, and on iHeartRadio. In the meantime, if you don't hear your show in this podcast format, fellow panelists and I still write reviews, and we always seek new panelists. So if you have any interest in joining the discussion, say hello by finding us at any of those outlets I've mentioned. At the very least, stop by and leave us a thumbs up, comment, or review. We like feedback, but remember, suicide is painless. I'm just saying. What? It's the name of the theme song, people. Today's panel is launching a new Looking Back series, and it's one of the most requested panels that our humble little podcast has ever embarked upon, having been solicited by both potential panelists and potential listeners alike. It's one of our all-time favorite shows, a show we all love dearly and hold very close to our TV-loving hearts. And if you aren't already aware, from time to time, CPU chooses shows of all types, but usually of some fame or notoriety to reminisce about, and to consider whether or not they age gracefully like an eager company clerk aiming to please, or don't hold up as well like Major Frank Burns, generally. As such, this is another chapter of our Looking Back podcast episodes wherein we review a show that has been gone, either via natural end or cancellation for some time. And today that show is, and try not to faint when I make this announcement because I know we've been advertising it for a long time, it is MASH! In fact, today is the first of 3 episode discussions in which we'll be looking back at one of the most popular sitcoms of all time, which in turn became one of the most popularly requested panels on CPU. Today, in the first episode of our series, we'll be discussing seasons 1 through 3, the Henry Blake, Trapper John McIntyre years. In part 2, our panel will discuss seasons 4 through 7, and in part 3, we'll talk seasons 8 through 11. As we start this new ongoing panel, and if you're not already aware, you should know that from time to time your chief couch potato and main moderator, that's me, needs a break, particularly when I think others are more passionate about the show we're discussing in the moment. Case in point, today's episode, which I am not here to moderate. Rather, frequent panelist Nick returns to the moderating microphone for this series. He is our second most involved panelist and our most involved moderator other than me. In this episode, Nick is joined by 4 of our occasional to frequent panelists, 1 brand new voice, and of course me, kicking back as a panelist myself. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome back Nick to the moderating microphone. Take it away, Nick.
Thank you, Kylie. I am so excited to start talking about this show with you guys. But first, MASH is an American war comedy drama, or dramedy, a word that didn't exist back when MASH first aired, and it did air on CBS from 1972 to 1983. The show was developed by Larry Gelbart and adapted from the feature film of the same name. The movie was based on Richard Hooker's 1968 novel, MASH, a novel about 3 Army doctors. Over the course of 11 seasons, the series follows a team of doctors and support staff stationed at the 4077 Mobile Army Surgical Hospital in South Korea during the Korean War. Joining me today in the swamp to discuss MASH is Josh, Sarah, Michael, Jen, Mary, and Kylie. Welcome, panel. Are you excited and ready to talk about MASH?
Of course.
Totes excited.
Perfect. Like I said, I'm really excited, but to kick off this discussion, we are going to do it with the standard CPU character breakdown. First, are you obsessed with the show, finding it to be a much-needed escape from the chaos of the outside world, like Hawkeye's obsession with his still and the martinis it produces? Do you like the show but don't mind missing or skipping an episode, especially if you have a date with a nurse, like the adulterous trapper John McIntyre? The show is good, but its formulaic nature has you seeing the punchline coming from a mile away, like Walter Radar O'Reilly. The show is fine, even mildly amusing, as long as your enjoyment of it doesn't get you in trouble with the brass. But you really would rather be playing a round of golf with a minefield like Colonel Henry Blake. It's annoying and disrespectful. You wish it would just pick a genre and stick to the regulations, like Margaret Hot Lips Houlihan. Or do you feel this show is full of communist degenerates? Does it fill you with rage from your patriotic army boots all the way up to your squinty little ferret face, like Major Frank Burns? Who would like to go first?
I will. I'll go first.
She's looking pointedly at you, so you might as well.
We're just answering the question. We're not saying anything else.
Thanks for co-moderating, Sarah. Tell us your character breakdown. You're right. How you came to start watching the show.
Okay, I'm going to do that.
Yeah, those two things.
Hi, I'm Sarah.
Hi, Sarah.
I'm married to Nick.
That seems to be the case.
I'm the bossy one in our relationship. So I watched MASH as a child when it was in syndication. And I mean like a child, like 3-4 years old. Not because I wanted to watch it, but number one, because there was only like 2 channels back then. And number 2, my dad watched it. So if dad was watching something, like we were not going to come in and be like, hey, let's put on Care Bears. No, we were watching MASH. But then I watched it from start to finish as an adult when I first was married to Nick. When we would fall asleep at night, Nick was rewatching it. So I would like catch bits and pieces and then we watched it from start to finish together. I am going to say that I am like the this is not my favorite character, but according to the character breakdown that you gave, I am like the adulterous trapper John McIntyre. Because I really like the show, but then there is just like a couple episodes peppered in here and there that I'm like, I don't really need to watch that. However, I have never cheated on my husband, and I do not intend to.
Thanks, Sarah.
You're welcome.
Have you seen the movie at all?
Never seen the movie.
Okay, so tell us your name, character, and I wanted to know who saw the movie.
Hi, I'm Michael.
Hi, Michael.
Hi, Michael.
So, MASH. If you listen to the Star Trek 50-plus episodes, you know that I've gotten into Star Trek because of my dad. Well, MASH is the exact opposite. I got into MASH because of my mom. My mom is big on old sitcoms of like the 50s, 60s, 70s, and MASH was one of her favorite shows when she was, a young woman back in the 70s. So whenever it was on in syndication, whenever it would come in reruns, there were usually like long marathons over holiday weekends on like USA, TNT, TBS. Back in the day, we would just watch these nonstop. And whenever it was syndicated on like a weekly basis or a daily basis, it was like appointment TV. My mom had, seen every episode multiple times, so she's quoting them constantly. And Sidney Freeman's line, "Ladies and gentlemen, take my advice, pull down your pants and sit and slide on the ice." That's like when my mom's she's saying that all the time. So it's kind of a staple in my family history of watching old TV shows. I have not necessarily seen every episode, but it's possible there are 1 or 2 in there that I've never seen, just because I never watched it from beginning to end. It was always just like whatever episode happened to come on. So I'm definitely, even though, again, I agree with Sarah, this is not one of my favorite characters. I am Trapper John in this sense of I can let an episode come and go, and it's not a big deal if I'm not going to see it from beginning to end. And as for the movie, I've never seen the movie from beginning to end. I've seen it in bits and pieces. It's one of those weird things where it's like the movie would be on TV and we would just like watch it here and there, depending on where it came in. And one of these days, before this podcast, these 3 episodes are up, I will sit down and watch the movie. But I've seen enough of it to be able to compare the two.
All right. Thanks, Michael.
Welcome back.
Many adulterers. Who wants to go next?
I'm Josh.
Hi, Josh.
Hey. And I just always remember the show. I cannot identify like early watching it because I feel like I just always watched it. It was always on during the time when you had like a TV that you had to plug into the wall without internet. It became super ingrained in my brain. In my early 20s, I worked second shift in a hotel, and I worked in the lobby TV. It was on like 2 hours every night during my shift, and I would just for years I watched 2 hours of MASH every night. So all of this was really interesting to go back and watch again. I guess, well, I'll say back in those days, I probably was a Hawkeye, but looking at it now, I'm probably an adulterer like the rest of you. As much as I enjoyed it, I was also like, there's other things you could also do. There's so much TV now, just like you were saying. I remember that I rented that DVD of the movie around that time when I was really interested in MASH. And I think I really don't remember much of it because I think I just generally rejected it as like, oh, this isn't really that thing that I love. I'm just not into this, and didn't really think too much about it.
Welcome back,
thanks,
Josh.
Hi, I'm Jen.
Hi, Jen.
Hi.
Hi.
So I got started with MASH. Actually, I'm really going to be showing my age or lack thereof right now. I started watching MASH when it started doing or showing reruns on TV Land. Because at the time, like, I'm not sure when it started syndication on there, but like we just got cable. Probably when I was like 12 or 13. And so my family grew up on MASH. So they started watching it. They kind of introduced me to it. I was watching it a little bit when they were, but obviously like 13, 14 years old, not really like too keen on watching something like that. But then as I got older, 2 things kind of sparked me wanting to like rewatch it and really enjoy MASH. One was in college, I took a class on mass media, which is studying like film, television, that kind of stuff. And MASH was often talked about because of the pop culture for it at the time, and how it changed a lot of stuff in television and also set so many different records for when the episodes first aired. But also, I don't want to say fun fact because it's not quite fun, but my great uncle was actually a soldier in the Korean War. Unfortunately, he passed away in combat, but a lot of stuff when they're talking about the Korean War, like I always think of my great uncle. So it's kind of interesting to see what it was kind of like, even if it is fictionalized, to see how that's kind of played out.
Thanks, Jen.
What's your
ever
character?
see the movie?
Wait, Kylie, what did you say?
What's your character?
Oh, I forgot about that. So character, I would say I'm Trapper. Again, not the adulterous parts, but just that a lot of this stuff's like, I like the episodes overall. There's a couple that like I don't mind skipping. I haven't seen the movie. However, I've also, I don't know if anyone's mentioned it, I've heard of the play before. There's a theater near where I live, I think, like maybe 3 or 4 years ago, like way before I moved to the area. They actually did it as a community theater production.
Did you say you saw it or you just heard of it?
I heard of it. So that kind of sparked my interest again.
Kylie, your alma mater did it.
Really? I didn't know that. But welcome back, Jen.
Yeah, thanks, Jen.
Hi, I'm Mary.
Hi,
this
Mary.
is my first panel, so I'm very excited.
Welcome to Couch Potatoes Unite.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. So I started watching in like the mid-90s, and my mom had loved this show, so I think a lot of us have that in common, that our parents sort of introduced it to us. And as best as I can recall, they re-aired the finale because they were going to start selling the box sets on VHS, which was amazing because that gave us like a Mother's Day, Christmas present, birthday gift for my mom for like the next 11 holidays, 12, because you bought the finale separately because it was on VHS. They were like, I think $4 VHS per season or 5 VHS per season. It was crazy. But so that was like a staple in our household then from that point on. And I nannied in college, and it was on TV Land from like 6 to 8 a.m. So I get there, the kids would still be in bed, and pull up for a couple of hours of MASH. I've watched the movie as an adult, like years later, and I also read the book.
Ooh.
And the book and the movie are the closest, but they're all three just kind of their own thing. Like, they share character names, they share sort of themes, but like everybody kind of treated the material differently. So in the beginning, I was definitely a Hawkeye, although some of that's just the nature of watching things on VHS. It's a lot harder to like skip through things. But now, like, I don't know, I've probably watched the whole series like 3 or 4 times. So now I'm like, I don't know if this is worth like 26 minutes of my life. Like Josh said, there's a lot of TV now. Like, there's a lot of cool stuff to watch. So sometimes it's hard to like put the time in on something that maybe wasn't quite up to scratch or just not in the mood for. So somewhere between a Hawkeye and a Trapper John.
All right. Welcome to CPU, Mary.
Thank you.
And I'm Kylie. I get to go before Nick when I'm not moderating. He's moderating, so I get to go. So, funny story. If you listen to the podcast, you know that the moderators send out helpful hints. And Nick managed to point out in these talking points that I am the old one on the panel. Not by a lot, thanks, but apparently I was singled out. So, like some of the people that have already talked, I can't say I honestly started watching it in the traditional sense of the word watching it. It was on when I was a very small child. I was born sometime in the middle of its run. It ended when I was about to turn 6 years old. That is my aging of myself on this episode. Thank you very much, listener. It's just a show that was always on in the house. As Sarah mentioned, there was only a few channels on the night, which I think was Sundays, when it came on. It was just on. I don't even know that my mom and dad loved the show per se. They liked it enough to have it on, and I have memories of not so much these seasons that we're about to talk about, but Colonel Potter and Klinger and Hot Lips and Hawkeye being on the tube, at least at times, and if I was allowed to stay up that long. I don't think that I ever sat down and watched the show or the episodes that we're about to talk about until percolation for the podcast started to emerge, beginning with Nick. It was basically, we'd like to talk about MASH, so I was like, well, maybe I should finally watch MASH. I had, however, seen the movie. The movie is one of the American Film Institute's highly rated top 100 movies, and I did go through that list. It is quite a bit different. The only thing that's the same is Radar. It's very interesting. And I'd be happy to talk about that. If I was going to rate myself along the character question, I would be Radar, actually. Squarely Radar. I like the show a lot. It's funny, but it, like sitcoms of the day, it probably created the formula that became the formula for other sitcoms, but it is formulaic, especially as you get into later seasons. And I have more favorite seasons and less favorite seasons, but we'll talk about that later, I'm sure. But for right now, I would say I was Radar.
All right, thanks, Kylie. It's my turn. I would say that my name is Nick, because that's part of...
You would say that? You mean that you have a secret other name that you wouldn't say?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good.
But I wouldn't say that I had a secret name.
Oh, right, sure.
I can't remember a time in my life where I didn't know about MASH. Like, if a grandparent came over and they were going to be over all day, MASH was a show that would be on at some point, because it was something that not only, yes, did they like, but we enjoyed watching it as well. I do have a memory of talking to my grandfather about why Winchester was better than Burns, and he did not agree with me. But I just always remember MASH being there. And I do remember when, for me, it was FX when I started really getting into it. FX was airing 2-hour time chunks. And I would watch and I was trying to watch every single one until finally one day they started releasing the DVDs. I didn't jump on the VHS bandwagon, but high school Nick had a job, and I'd put half of my paycheck into my savings, and almost the other half went towards DVDs like X-Files, Star Trek, Quantum Leap, and MASH. At this point, they were just coming out, so I was literally waiting for the next season of almost all of those shows to be released. So I was always very excited about finding an episode that I hadn't seen because syndication just threw them up randomly. I just always remember enjoying this show, and the more I watch it, the more I like it. I find it really rewatchable. I still find it pretty relevant. So I'm Hawkeye, seasons 1 through 3 specifically. I might be the farthest away from a Hawkeye, but I would still say a Hawkeye. Again, we'll talk about how the show shifts over the 11 seasons it was on. And I did see the movie. I saw the movie a long time ago. Did not really enjoy it that much. Would be interested to rewatch it just because it was so long, and I think at this point in my life, I can separate it from the MASH I know and love, and this is its own separate thing. But it definitely, I think when I watched it, I was hoping it was just a continuation of MASH and just seeing a slightly different version. But it's pretty different.
Do you think we should talk about how in this time of social distancing, you have long, floppy Alan Alda hair right now?
Here, let's talk about it.
That nobody can see except us.
Envision a young Alan Alda moderating this podcast.
I'm fine with that.
Okay.
I have been told throughout my life by random people I look like Alan Alda, and I am not offended by it.
No, but you don't have as big of an Adam's apple.
This got weird. Weird. Moderate.
Not weird. It's
all right, let's dive into the discussion. And first, let's just talk about these 3 seasons, 1 through 3 in general. What are the things you loved about it? What are the things you hate? You could be as general or specific as you want. Everyone should be talking at once.
Okay, so what I will say is I can definitely say that in my earlier years when I was a kid, they weren't syndicating anything yet. So the Trapper John / Colonel Blake years were all brand new to me. And I was surprised when I sat down to watch them how much of a different feel they do have compared to the Colonel Potter / BJ Honeycutt years. It's a little sharper, a little edgier, a little more satirical, and I like that quality, but there's also, it takes a while to find the heart that becomes the MASH trademark. The first season's a little rocky for me, particularly. I don't hate any of it. I'm not a real big fan of Frank Burns, even as a villain or a B-villain in the sitcom, but I don't hate any of it. It's just, I don't really love these 3 seasons compared to the overall 11 of them.
It's funny you say that's more satirical, because I don't really get that impression from these seasons. I mean, I sense the satire that's there. I feel like it takes a while for it to manifest. It seems to me like when they started this show, it was a very popular movie in 1970, and they were like, oh, let's make a TV show out of this movie. And they hired Larry Gelbart, who's a sitcom veteran. So it became a traditional sitcom. I mean, there's a laugh track. There's Alan Alda is doing Groucho Marx impersonations in like the 5th episode. And he's even making comments that are the one-liners are very Marxist Brothers-esque, in my opinion. It's just very... to me, the show doesn't seem like a satire until later. There are elements in certain episodes, but it almost seems to me that this is a traditional sitcom of the 1970s with very little seriousness until like the end of the 3rd season, when suddenly everything gets like blown out of the water, and suddenly this show becomes it becomes a cultural icon and a cultural, like, it just revolutionized TV in that one episode, basically.
See, I think it is a little bit more satirical in the traditional sitcom years because it was contemporary to the Vietnam War. True. And it was telling it through the lens of the Korean War. And I would actually argue that the drama started to percolate in the 2nd season with some of the message episodes. Mm-hmm. But it was still told with the laugh track, and it was still told with... Trapper John by nature is a very snarky guy, and Hawkeye and Trapper's rapport has that sort of satirical bend in these first 3 seasons. where there's a lot more commentary on the foolishness of war between the two of them, whereas that kind of eases into sort of a relaxed commentary when BJ comes onto the scene. So I don't think it's more satirical later. I think it's actually more satirical earlier. It becomes more dramatic later.
I think the first season in particular is really trying to bridge between the movie and, you know, they had this source material that was not going to fly as a Sunday night sitcom on CBS. Like, so how do you take this, like, Robert Altman film and put it into a package that CBS is like, we can sell this to advertisers? So especially that first season, it's like they're trying to still keep that edge and that really strong commentary on the Vietnam War. But they're like, we can make this palatable by having him do a Groucho Marx impression. Like, this is how we sneak it in. And it definitely took them a little while to sort of settle into the comfortable, like, formulaic sitcom. And I think you see that when you have, like, the Dear Dad episode, and then you have another one, like, 6 episodes later or something like that. Like, it was like, oh, here's what we're doing. Oh, wait, here's what we're doing. So you get that, like, they really spent a lot longer than maybe you see in current sitcoms, like, figuring out what they were going to do and how they were going to do it.
I think that's a good point. If the book is loosely based on an actual MASH unit, so I'm not sure how much of each character is based on reality in the movie. I think they are trying to bridge the movie to being to the TV show somewhere in between. Because one of my takeaways from the movie was that Hawkeye and Trapper weren't really likable characters.
No.
So they're trying to figure out how to have them be a little bit more likable throughout at least the first season, trying to get there. And then I feel like once we get out of the first 3 seasons, we're really feel more at home with some of the characters as we're meeting new characters.
Well, and the movie was released only 2 years before the show premiered, so that was smack dab in the Vietnam War. And the movie also takes that tone. It's very darkly comic, as opposed to even the yuck sitcom comedy type mode of the show. So I agree with Mary and you. I think that first season really is attempting to connect the two. But fortunately, the wonderful thing about MASH, I think, is it had a lot of changes and it adjusted very well to all of them. But even in the first 3 seasons, there were so many changes in terms of the style of the storytelling, from season to season, and sometimes a few episodes to a few episodes.
Did anyone else find the mix of dark and light to be just really weird? Like, you couldn't play a show like that today, and it's obvious that this isn't a show of today, but just sitting down and watching like that, I basically watched that first season in a couple days, like just right in order. Like even if they play the concept of war a certain way where they can satirize it, there's no way for them to like round off the edge of like, these are just people coping in unhealthy ways while they watch people die where they would rather be anywhere else. Like, and then when there's the little yuck lines, like, even though I like the yuck lines and think they're funny, it's like, oh man, that makes it darker and sadder and weirder. How is this such a big show?
But I think that kind of goes back to what Nick said, like, in the source material and even kind of throughout, like, Hawkeye is not beloved, and maybe that's kind of a controversial take, but I don't, like, he's a good person, I think, in his core, like, and he does good things for people, and he wants to save people. He's a good doctor, but, like, he's really selfish through the whole run of the series. Like, it always comes back to him. It always comes back to, like, how he's kind of, like, he's better than everybody, so he's suffering more. And some of that is he's the main character, I suppose. It's the lens of the show, but, like, they're not perfect people. Like, they have foibles and they have idiosyncrasies that are terrible. Like, they really rub on each other intentionally sometimes, like, just for the sake of doing it and that kind of thing.
Well, I also think what the show does more effectively than the movie, I mean, I think Hawkeye is more lovable even with all of those qualities because he's set up against people like Frank Burns and then later Charles Winchester III. So they're much more selfish and all the things you just said. So Hawkeye, by comparison on a relativity scale, isn't quite so bad and at least has the sense of humor that you're talking about, Josh, where it's a little weird, but it's clearly a coping mechanism. So
the characters themselves even like point out Hawkeye's selfishness, and I think several of the nurses at certain points call him like, you're a cool, I don't remember what they say, but they basically like call him out on his BS. Yeah. So I feel like it seems to me like later on that selfishness goes away. I don't know. We'll get to that obviously, but
I wonder if some of it kind of goes away too once Trapper leaves, just because it is like a different dynamic that he's working with.
I agree with that. Trapper and Hawkeye together I like Trapper. He's not my favorite character. I don't hate him though. But he's more acerbic than Hawkeye, and that rapport is more acerbic than Hawkeye and BJ, and it's really noticeable when that character leaves. I mean, he's almost the tone creator for these first 3 seasons, I would argue, even more so than Hawkeye or any of the other individuals, because once Trapper's humor or contribution disappears and morphs into BJ, who's a lot different, the show's tone really changes.
We get Colonel Potter at the same time too, and I think Henry Blake, he can't stand up to the two of them. He tries a couple of times, and they just ignore him. Like, no, you can't go to Tokyo, and then the next thing you know, they're in Tokyo. Like, there was no adult in the room in the first 3 seasons. Like,
well, Frank Burns probably tried, but no one liked him, so they're just like, we know we need an adult, but we just don't want it to be you.
But then he becomes like a sniveling child whenever anyone questions his authority. So, I mean, there's
that too, yeah.
Well, and he does such stupid stuff. Like, one of the things that always stood out to me is the one where they're trying to get Henry court-martialed because he's helping the orphans. And he's having them paint all of the rocks in the camp white, which Margaret points out to him, like, you can't do that. Like, that makes us visible to planes and snipers and... Mm-hmm. He's like, but I want the rocks to be white. Like, he's so incompetent in everything he tries to do.
Right. One of the few things I wrote down watching this was Hawkeye and Frank Burns are the original Jim and Dwight. I don't know if that's a thought that's been had before, but there was a moment where I was like, I've seen all these scenes before, except for they played out in The Office.
I buy that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did not make that connection. And I feel like I wonder if that extends a little bit better once it's Winchester, or at least if you think of Dwight's story arc and how, because Frank, it's really hard. Hawkeye and Trapper are so horrible to Frank, and you don't really mind because Frank
deserves it.
Yeah.
Yeah, the terrible surgeon. He's an insolent child. Like, it's just, I don't know. But Frank is just, at least Winchester is a good doctor. He's saving lives. He's just pompous and arrogant. He doesn't feel like a horrible, horrible person, whereas Frank Burns, it's almost like, at least the first 3 seasons, there's no redeeming quality to it.
I would also beg to say that, and I am a big Office fan, but I don't think they hate Dwight. I think
there's mutual respect.
Kind of obnoxious and weird, but in the end, he's like his bestest, what is the...
Best man?
Yeah, but they say it
Bestest mensch.
But I think that they kind of like hate Frank. I don't know about the word hate. No, I don't know. I see your correlation, and I love where you're going with that, Josh, because I love The Office. But
I think the antics is a direct thing, and then I think that's what I was saying, the Winchester vibe, because I don't think after a couple of seasons of Winchester, they don't hate Winchester as much, because one of their big issues, and they have a couple of issues with Frank, he's a terrible doctor, and he gives up pretty easily, and that's this show, like, there's so many things it does that's ahead of its time, but that's a character that's really hard to see prior to MASH being on primetime network television. That's just like, well, they're dead. A lot of times you only did that when it was a Korean, which now is still horrible, but maybe back then audiences didn't mind.
Okay, so this is one of the things that when I started watching it with Nick, I think it took me a really long time to get over this, is the adultery that's happening.
Yes. It's so blatant in these first 3 seasons.
Yeah, and I was like, what do you mean there he's married? And Nick's like, he just cheats on his wife. And I'm like, but he can't do that.
And it makes you feel better, they were all drunk the whole time.
Well, and I've never been in war, so I guess I trying not to judge them, but it's like, I don't think that they depict adultery like that on TV now. I think it's more in like our dramas, maybe.
Like in like Grey's Anatomy and like ER, I mean, you have like a lot of like partner swapping and stuff, but like it seems to be like serial. It's like, oh, they're with this person, and then this couple breaks up and they go date these other two people, and then they break up and they reconfigure. It's not just like everyone's cheating on whoever happens to be available at the moment.
Yeah.
I mean, I take it as it must have been very commonplace during, like, for soldiers overseas in the 50s. Because even while this show is airing, I think that was a conscious effort to be like, okay, BJ and Potter are not adulterous once we bring them in. Like, that is a tonal shift that made it feel more in line with other shows airing at the time, but might actually be taking us a step removed from the parallels to reality.
Well, and Margaret changes quite a bit. For me, going back and rewatching it, you know, kind of over the last few weeks, that's the thing for me that's been kind of the hardest, or like the hardest thing to stomach now as an adult is like, Margaret's a really good nurse and she's a career Army officer, but there's also this implication that she just sort of slept her way to the top, even though she's highly qualified and talented. And somewhere in the middle, they sort of like just jettison all of that. And so I guess it's kind of jumping the gun to maybe like the next episode of our chat. But like, I guess I'm glad that happened, because watching it now, I'm like, oh, the only main female character in this has no redeeming qualities in the first 3 seasons.
She's basically depicted as a shrew, and
she likes
really
Frank.
Terrible.
She likes Frank. She's the only one.
She likes Frank, and
she and Frank hide their adultery. They hide the fact. They are at least attempting to like hide it. I'm not saying that's any better or any worse, but that seems to be more like what I would assume would be happening.
Because they're both.
No, Margaret's not.
Yeah, well, Margaret's not being adulterous.
No, but Frank is, and Margaret doesn't want anybody to know that they're sleeping.
And every time that Frank brings up his wife, she gets really super upset.
Yeah.
She would like Frank
to
leave his wife for her.
That is one of the funny things about Frank in the TV show, is that in the movie, he's depicted as this religious zealot who's constantly like Bible beating and everything. And the fact that he's having a very blatant hot and heavy affair with Hot Lips is seen as this ultimate hypocrisy, which is part of the reason why they hate him, is because it's blatant hypocrisy. But it's not really there in the TV show much. I mean, I did notice in a couple early episodes, whenever he's reading a book, the book is the Bible, but they don't bring it up as like, oh, you go back to your Bible or whatever. So it's interesting that aspect of his character is kind of downplayed.
Yeah, I wonder, because he is kind of the villain and he's the only main character, at least in the first 3 seasons, since Father Mulcahy's only recurring. Like, so that's like the religious character. And there might have been a lot of audiences that don't like that. He's a hypocrite because he doesn't like that Trapper's adulteress or Blake.
Yeah,
Robert Duvall played him in the movie.
Robert Duvall did?
Yeah, isn't that weird? I don't know. He's just nothing.
In the movie, all of the archetypes were sort of beat on the head, like super obvious. I think they were, downplayed was the word you used, because this was a primetime sitcom. So all of the archetypes were there. It just wasn't in your face archetypes to fit in a 2-hour movie, because it was spread out. So the Bible stuff was there. I mean, he did, especially I feel like in earlier episodes, maybe in the first season, there was more mention of the Bible and stuff like that, but it kind of relaxes over time as Frank, I don't want to say evolves, because I don't think he truly does, but progresses through the episodes. They don't hit on it as much, but I do think, back to Mary's original point of bridging the movie, I do think they hit on it early, and you do see it. It just isn't, it's not a remaining constant, and it's a primetime sitcom, so they probably didn't want to be too much with any of it.
I feel like in place of him being pretty much like the Bible thumper in the movie, I feel like they replaced it with him just being like so strict by the book for like all the military stuff. So it's essentially being like the stick in the mud, like no fun sergeant kind of thing.
Well, they
I think
actively like get hot about authoritarianism and hierarchy. They start talking about army stuff, and then they're like all over each other. Pretty weird.
Don't judge them,
Don't
Josh.
kink shame, Josh.
That was not a word they used. Kink shame.
Did anyone not watch the Hulu widescreen version? Did anybody watch it in 4:3? 3:4?
You know, I noticed that when I was
It
watching
was
it on
super
Hulu.
weird when I noticed it.
Yeah,
Like,
it's like,
I
wait a
watched like a
minute.
season and a half, and I was like, how? What? How? What?
It's like, obviously they must have cut off the top and bottom of the screen. But I was like, oh wait, that's weird. When I noticed it, it didn't seem like it was that big of a deal. But
Well, I thought it looked good. I looked it up, and I guess it was originally shot a little bit wider than what they aired. So they like recovered the wide stuff and cut some of the top and bottom off. The internet has opinions. It wasn't a problem. Just it was weird once I realized I'd watched so much of this differently.
I didn't even notice or actively select it.
Well, usually when, you go from a square screen to a wide screen, it usually, you can tell because it cuts off somewhere it's getting cut off, and then you can kind of tell that it's just a jarring. This is a kind of a weird comparison, but I watch Jeopardy a lot, and my mom has a square TV. It's filmed in widescreen now, and so you can tell when you watch it now, it just looks cramped or something.
Well, I think when Disney Plus first started and The Simpsons were on there, I think they changed it to, I hope I'm getting the dimensions right, I think they changed it to widescreen, but because of it, and that's how Disney had it acquired, they were cutting out a lot of the gags that were illustrated in the episodes, so people were petitioning, saying, you should turn it back to the way it was, and Disney listened, and they switched it back.
I wish that they would stop. I guess that's me, but I've been rewatching Avatar: The Last Airbender, as many people have been, and they just show it in 4:3 on Netflix. There's black bars on the side, and it does not bother me at all. I was watching the Anne of Green Gables, the CBC one from the 80s, and when they digitally remastered it, they put it into widescreen, and so they did this pan thing, and they cut parts of the scenes out, but then every once in a while they can't do that, so all of a sudden you'll have this random screen that's stretched so they could get the whole scene in. And to me, it doesn't really add anything for the experience. And if you've watched it before, sometimes then it sort of jars you because you're like, well, wait, wasn't there something happening off in this corner that I can't see anymore?
Well, my fancy MASH DVDs have the option to turn the laugh track off, and it is
really
disturbing.
When they played it in other markets, international markets, it doesn't have a laugh track on it.
That makes sense.
I only tried it with the first season because I did not like it, and I wonder if, since I do like the other seasons more than seasons 1 through 3, if I would have noticed it as much, because I know where the jokes are without a fake audience telling me in seasons 4 and beyond.
Well, I think doesn't the laugh track disappear about 2, 3, or 4 or 5 seasons in? I think
does it?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it does.
It does. They consciously removed it sometime after season 3, and I want to say it was 4, actually.
In the beginning, there are some episodes, I think the first one is in season 2, where they intentionally shot it without a laugh track. It was the one where they just do marathon surgery for an entire episode.
That's one of my favorite episodes from these 3 seasons.
But they intentionally shot it without a laugh track, and it was groundbreaking at the time that you had this sitcom that didn't have a laugh track. I think they won a bunch of Emmys for it because everyone was like, "Oh, what is this new thing? You made us watch 26 minutes of television with no laughter."
That wasn't considered that was still considered a comedy.
After season 6, the laughter was toned down immensely, and later episodes featured a hush track. So it's still there, but it's not as prominent as what this says. This says that Larry Gelbart did not want a laugh track, but CBS had never done a comedy without a laugh track and was like, you gotta have one, we're paying for it.
And the episode that Mary is talking about is episode 5 of season 3, OR. And it is noted to be the first episode of the entire series without a laugh track at all.
They were able to remove it for OR, the bus, Quo Vadis, Captain Chandler, the interview, Dreams, Point of View, and Farewell, Goodbye, Farewell, and Amen.
Probably be talking about all of those episodes throughout the 3 parts of this series.
All pretty, significant ones, I would say.
And OR, since we bring it up, and it is in this, it won an Emmy for Outstanding Director in a Comedy Series, one of the 14 Emmys that MASH won, and those 14 Emmys are out of the over 100 they were nominated for throughout the whole show. So it was a pretty good show. So we were talking in general about seasons 1 through 3. Before we start getting a little bit more specific, I think I already know, but I just kind of want to see, because I do know people, like I said, my grandpa was one of them, where seasons 1 through 3 was their favorite out of the show. Did anyone prefer seasons 1 through 3, that tone?
No.
No, I'm going to be more animated in our second episode.
Do we have Jamie Farr yet, or is
he starts, but he's recurring.
Yes.
Okay.
So I actually found something out that was kind of cool when I was looking to see who each of the actors was, just to see, have I seen them in anything since? And I guess Jamie Farr, who plays Klinger, he was actually he served in Korea, I think, a couple of years after the war. And he ends up wearing his actual dog tags for his character in the series.
Wow.
He's
I did not know that.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And he's always been one of my favorite characters.
Me too.
Yeah.
Well, and he was just supposed to be a cameo, background character. And because it's kind of weird. He comes in, he's in drag in the first season. And then there's that kind of weird episode with the bandana. And then he comes back as the Klinger we all know and love. I'm assuming it was that bit scene where he's in a nurse's uniform that sort of played well with audiences and got him on ultimately as a regular. But yeah, he was just supposed to be
That's what blows me away. Yeah, he was, again, when I watch these shows before, they've always been out of order. But when I started watching the first season in order, I was blown away by the fact that in that Dear Dad episode, he has a grenade in his hand. He's not in drag. He's a completely different character. And the fact that was one of the first appearances of his character blew me away. Because I was like, whoa, I always thought that came later in the series. But no, it was one of the first. And of course, the drag thing was a very big deal. I mean, that's obviously what made him popular. But it's just so weird to me that was one of his second or third appearances on the show ever.
I always remember that. That's what I remember from watching it with my dad. I remember almost every time asking him, Dad, why is that guy wearing a dress? Because it just didn't compute with my 3-4-year-old brain. It wasn't an easy answer. My dad was like, well, he's trying to get out and he's trying to seem crazy. And I'm like, why is that crazy? I don't know. Little Sarah was ahead of her time with UBU, I guess. But I still remember asking him, and I think he would get tired of me asking. So sorry, Dad, if you're listening.
Yeah,
I remember at least watching it reruns, at least early mid 2000s, and seeing Klinger's character. And I would ask my parents, I'm surprised that they would let him kind of get away with that. I mean, obviously they weren't directly in the United States at the time. It was in a war zone, but even depicting it on television, having someone cross-dressing.
But I think it was because they were saying, we know you're just doing this to get out. We're not letting you out. So,
right. That's what I think now, they couldn't do it quite like that. They'd have to have more explanation, but it's well, they did actually have one episode where they had a soldier come out as homosexual that they were trying to keep under wraps.
That's
the Klinger thing, it's not really
George, sorry.
They're not addressing cross-dressing. They have a character who wears a dress as a gag.
Right.
Yeah.
They're real careful to be whoa, I'm into ladies and I do this to try to get out of the army. They make it so that everyone at the time is okay with laughing about it.
Well,
in a way.
Getting out of the army via Section 8, which is the psychiatric dismissal, so that's the other piece.
And they picked the swarthiest, hairiest guy to do it.
Right. It was done in a specific way that
yeah.
We just think about things differently now.
Yeah.
Which it was kind of interesting to rewatch the episodes in context of Me Too as well. Like, not only the adultery stuff, but also with how they, like, I think I remember a couple episodes where they were just, like, randomly kissing, like, hula hands. Like, yeah, that would not fly right now, or any of their talks, or, like, sexual harassment or anything like that.
Yeah, hanging out by the showers. You don't need to be by the showers. Back it off.
One of the things, this is getting into later episodes because I don't think it maybe happens once or twice in the early seasons, but you're right. There's a lot of potential sexual harassment, but the nurses also get them back on a few occasions too, so.
Well, and even with it, like, it's meant, I mean, obviously it takes place in Korean War in 1950s, but it's set with kind of like the minorities, like, make comparisons with the Vietnam War in the 70s. And obviously that was like almost 50 years ago that this show was made. So even with it, like, with that context, like, I think it still ages okay compared to, like, with Friends, where it's supposed to be set in modern time.
I still say Friends is progressive. That's for our Friends episodes, which we've already recorded. Please find them at your podcast outlets near you. I have strong feelings. Okay.
One of the things, though, I do like in the first couple of seasons that you lose in the later part of the series is the nurses are actually characters with, like, names and backstories, and they're, like, participants in what's happening. So, I mean, there were definitely some comments that I was like, oh, yeah, nope, you definitely couldn't make that comment today. You know, hey, baby, give me a, like, whatever instrument, like, that kind of chatter. But, like, they had names, they had stories, they had roles to play. And in the later seasons, they become Nurse Abel, Nurse Baker, and they're not necessarily the same woman. From episode to episode, you have Nurse Kelly, who sort of emerges later, but, you know, you had Ginger Bayless, so you actually had a little bit more representation in the first couple of seasons that then goes away, and as you focus on, like, the 6 or 7 core characters, and everyone else just becomes background chatter. So I guess that's one thing in its favor for those first 2 or 3 seasons.
Yeah, there is that one episode that's kind of Edwina in the first season. It's almost like a riff on Lysistrata, where the nurses go on a bit of a sex strike until one of their own has a date with one of the soldiers.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that one.
Mm-hmm. That's an episode I've seen many, many times, and sure, it's very slapsticky with the fact that she's klutzy and constantly, you know, sitting on, you know, stepping on Hawkeye's feet and just being clumsy and what have you. But it's interesting that is sort of a riff on an ancient Greek tragedy, or not tragedy, but a ancient Greek comedy, or Roman, maybe. I don't know.
I was going to say, I think the nurses become background, like, way later because they're still present. The reason why I'm going to say I like seasons 4 through 7 the best, because that's when you get Potter and BJ, but you still have all of the other elements, including Radar, that make the first 3 seasons kind of what they are, and it's all put together. I feel like those are the sweet spot seasons. So, to answer a couple of questions, but also just piggybacking off that comment, I think it continues into the middle seasons of the show, but it does definitely fall away by the later seasons.
Yeah, definitely. I think once you get into 8 and beyond, they have both extremes with the comedy and drama and serious, but you start to feel or see a little bit more of the sitcom structure. And it is like these are 6 or maybe it's 8 characters at that point with Mulcahy and Klinger. So you see less of those. And I don't think it was consciously let's forget about those nurses or side characters, but I think it's more let's focus on this group of people as a cast. Which even that, some of those moments, well, we could talk about that later. But I like those moments too, and that aspect of it too. I think one of the reasons the show lasted 11 seasons is it did change, because if it stuck with any of those chunks for that long, it would be really hard to rewatch.
I can think of right now, just with, like, NCIS, obviously not quite the same show, but, like, they've been running, I think, for, like, 17, 18 seasons. Like, there's been a lot of different changes since then, and, like, the fact that it's still on air for that long, like, if they didn't make those changes, like, obviously, you probably still wouldn't be on the air, but my parents are like that right now with NCIS, where, like, that's their show, that's what they watch. If there's marathons, they watch it. I don't think, obviously, it's going to have the same reputation as MASH, but I wouldn't be surprised if they took some inspiration from MASH and help, like, keep that show going.
I kind of wanted to shift gears into, we've peppered in a couple of episodes here and there, but are there any that stand out that anyone wanted to talk about specifically?
I can't remember what the episode was called, but it was the one where they were doing the gurney racing.
Oh, wow.
So, but I think that was in season 2. So what made me think of it is, obviously right now in the pandemic, obviously hospital staff's working overtime to help all the patients that have COVID, but they've been giving, like, you'll see videos of them online with, like, them trying to, like, do stress relief or do, like, funny dances or stuff like that, just to kind of help, like, deal with the stress and blow off some steam. And depending on which way you fall politically, and which I kind of took this with Frank Burns, was that, like, I know right now conservatives are kind of upset with seeing that kind of stuff on social media because they think, like, oh, you're not doing your job, you're just wasting time, like, you're just making a joke out of it kind of thing. But what made me think about it for MASH was that, because Frank Burns was like that too, he's like, you're wasting supplies, you're wasting time. What made me think of it was that, like, well, they're blowing off steam in, like, a very highly, like, stressful situation that is not going to go away anytime soon. So it's like, this is one way that they're coping with it. So obviously it's like, don't waste materials or anything to help people, like, save their lives or whatever. But, like, if you need to blow off steam like that, then blow off steam.
That's the trial of Henry Blake.
Oh, that is a
Trial
good
of
episode.
Henry Blake.
Yep.
Yeah, that's actually I enjoy that episode a lot because it comes with comeuppance for Frank.
Yeah. There is another episode, too, where Trapper comes close to actually adopting a Korean boy.
That episode gets me. It's called Kim. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What really, like, got to me was towards the end of the episode when the boy wanders out into the landmine and everyone is just, like, silent trying to get him out. I was just kind of, even with rewatching it, because I couldn't remember how it ended, I was just kind of sitting on the edge of the bed just being like, what's going to happen? Like, I mean, they're probably going to be okay, but still, it's like, oh my gosh.
I remember that episode from when I was young, just watching it and being terrified.
I know we already talked a little bit about it, but I want to highlight OR again. Watching this for the first time in my adult years, you know, I don't know that I was paying too close of attention to the show, even in these first few seasons, but OR really made me sit up and pay attention just because, again, tonally, it's so different from a lot of the episodes around it, and it sticks with me. It's not really comedic at all. It's purely dramatic, and I like the different episodes where MASH kind of flipped the script and said, we're not going to be a sitcom today, we're going to be a drama. This is how we're going to do it, and for some reason that one particularly sets in my brain.
It's a good one, and it's really interesting to see the different ways they deal with trying to let the audience feel the strain on the medical staff. And in some episodes, it's just, you don't even see any of the OR situation. It's the other side of it. It's like, oh, it's been 16 hours or it's been 3 days. Sometimes they say it's 3 days. And I think as a kid, that didn't even mean anything to me, but they're literally just sipping orange juice and trying to save people's lives the whole time. Yeah, I think OR does a really good job of showing what they're kind of going through.
I'm looking at Nick's list, which this is cheating, but the episode called George, that's the one where the soldier is beaten by his own unit because they find out that he is gay. That is just, I don't know.
That episode is from 1974, I believe, and when I was watching this and watched that episode, I was quite frankly shocked that a sitcom of this age told that story. I thought, wow, MASH was really ahead of its time in ways that I didn't even contemplate, because it was still told with, you know, sort of the same sensitivity that I think it might be told today. It's just a little bit more veiled because of its time period, and I was amazed that they
even like
did that.
All in the Family, even All in the Family has a bit of a, which was airing at the exact same time on the same network. They don't even necessarily depict, you know, homosexuality in a progressive way, at least what we would consider progressive. So it's kind of impressive that a show like MASH would do that.
They really, I mean, they deal with a lot of stuff, not just the Korean conflict during the Vietnam War, but there's just a lot, and seasons 1 through 3 have a couple episodes like that. Did anyone else have episodes they wanted to highlight?
I did mark down the season 1 finale, Showtime. A number of episodes have kind of like framing structure, but that one has where you like watch the USO show. It also has a thing that I like from the character's name is Henry, the Colonel. Anytime he interacts with a baby or thinks about a baby, he gets like real soft and cute. And I've always liked that. But my favorite thing was they show Radar doing a Gene Krupa impersonation, which if you like MASH and you like jazz drummers and want to see Radar do a Gene Krupa impersonation, he does it, and it's pretty fun.
I have to say, we haven't really talked about Radar. And
That
Radar,
is a tragedy, yes.
yeah, and
Yeah,
he might be my favorite character. I don't know if he's my favorite character of the whole show, but definitely in the first 3 seasons, he's my favorite character. Just because Walter, what's his real name?
Walter
Gary Berghoff.
Gary Berghoff.
Gary Berghoff, that's right. He was in the movie. The Radar in the movie is similar. He's not the same, but he's so unexpected so often in the show. He has some of the heartfelt moments, a lot of the heartfelt moments, but then he also comes in with this type of stuff in the Showtime episode. He's kind of really versatile, and I'm super sad about the fact that he decided to leave the show somewhere along the line, because that's when the show took a turn for me. But I love Radar, and I love his relationship with Blake particularly. That's kind of a really fun relationship, very father-son. And I don't know if we're ready to talk about, but the season finale of season 3.
I was just going to say, allegedly, according to IMDb, he didn't really get along with anybody on set. Like, they all...
Oh, really?
Yeah, they all...
Are we talking about Berghoff or
I'm talking
the Henry
about
Blake
Gary
character?
Yes, Gary. Whereas they all really liked Larry Linville, who played Frank. It says they all got along great with him in real life, but he was known for being difficult to work with. And
He lasted for 7 seasons.
well,
But the character really changed too after Henry Blake, after McLean Stevens chose to leave. Radar became this like really infantile character. Like in the first 3 seasons, you see him smoking cigars and playing poker, and he still has that sort of innocent quality. Like he wants to get his high school diploma, and so there's still that sort of like down on the farm, like local boy naivete, but like he sort of changes and kind of just becomes this like total rube, and like he smokes cigars for 3 seasons, and then in like season 4 or 5 they give him a cigar and he's like like he's never seen one before, and previously he's puffing on one, running book for 5 o'clock Charlie. Like,
well, I mean, we could make the argument that because the show lasted 11 seasons and the war only lasted 3, that we're not getting in a chronological progression of anything. So, like,
Are you saying TV is not real?
If you really analyze the timeline, it is tough because there are moments where Trapper will mention how long he's been there.
Exactly, yeah.
And then DJ will mention how long he's been there, and it's, well, was Trapper only there for a day? I don't understand.
Binge watching this show, knowing that it never was intended for that type of consumption, lets you know that they were really less hung up with the types of things that seem really important now. Yeah, there's some weird stuff if you literally, like, I think I watched these 3 seasons over like 10 days or something. Like, and if you're watching it that way, some stuff really jumps out at you in a way that, even though I've spent way more time watching this, just never occurred to me. Or there'd be no way to even verify if I thought something like somebody mentions how long they've been there and I start writing down on a piece of paper if that's possible.
Well, if you think about it too, like if you missed an episode, unlike now, like you missed an episode, you'd have to hear from your friends what the recap is or something like that. Like you couldn't just watch it the next day on Hulu or anything like that. So they might have been banking on that, like obviously they could predict like what Hulu and Netflix was going to be at that time, but I think they were kind of banking on that too, knowing that like, oh, well, obviously there's going to be the loyal fans that watch it, but it's going to be like a week span or whatever before the next episode, and even with it, they might miss the episode. So because they're not as close together, and people might not be able to access them, like to rewatch them, like they might not remember everything the exact way.
And once you get to the point where the TV show is going to be longer than the police action that it's covering, you have to sort of rewind the clock.
Yeah.
Like, what else can you do? Like, oh, it's 1962. Just kidding, it's 1960. There's nothing else you can do, and they're like, we want another season from you.
We shouldn't talk about this, but there's an episode later in the series that literally takes place over an entire year. But anyway.
Yeah.
One for all seasons.
TV back then was really not, I mean, it wasn't about tracking continuity week to week. It was about comfort. It was about the family sitting around the one or maybe two, if you were rich, television sets with the three major networks. MASH was clearly the winner of the three networks for most of its run, and presenting the same formula week after week so that people knew what to expect while at the same time enjoying something fresh based upon how they tweak the formula for the week. So continuity is not even realistic expectation for 1972 to 1975.
You keep saying formula. That's so, I don't know. It's weird when you say formula for this show. I don't see this show as formulaic at all.
I see it as the creator of the formula that would bear out in things like Cheers, Frasier, The Office was already mentioned. Friends even is somewhat influenced by this show because of the ensemble factor and the contemporary ages. I mean, MASH in many ways was the pioneer of the very formula that has informed sitcoms for the decades following, at least until the documentary.
Might struggle with it, Michael, because while I do see it as formulaic and there's a formula and they can repeat, it's also, they do some very different episodes throughout the whole 11 seasons. So they break from the formula a lot too. And in some ways, some of those episodes might not seem like that big a deal, but man, when they did do one that's in real time or that's from the point of view of the camera the whole time, like they take some pretty big swings for the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
But then they always return back to the format that made them what they were. So,
well, how would you define the formula of MASH?
The three-act
sitcom, usually with Hawkeye and his bunkie. Well, it's Trapper in the first 3 seasons, it's BJ in the rest, with their cornerstone of yucks and jokes and usually alcohol involved. You had the Colonel was always either Blake was kowtowing to them or Potter was trying to put them in line. You had your B-villain, which was either Frank in the first 3 seasons or Charles in the later seasons. And then it was just the situation that changed. And those character archetypes were fit to that formula. Sometimes it was more dramatic, but by and large, the episodes were the hijinks of the 4077 in that week.
And how often did the gangs having fun get interrupted by choppers? Like
Correct.
At its nature, it was trying to be formulaic too because of the redundancy of war and it dragging on and them being bored and how are they combating boredom. I don't think the formula is a bad thing. I think there's something, because we're trying to make episodes for 11 seasons because sponsors are paying for it. There are some episodes that you can probably skip or, okay, he's mad he didn't get a promotion again. Like they do recycle some stuff in that formula, but...
I guess when I hear... Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Mary.
I was going to say, even within... If you look at the first season, like, it sort of lays out the template for all the future seasons. Like, they may not call it Dear Dad, but, you know, Mulcahy does the Dear Sis. There's... Or like the USO episode, which there's actually one of those later.
Yep.
Like in season 7, I think maybe. You know, so you get that thing where we've got this framework where we do these little vignettes and catch you up on everyone. We've got the regular army general, colonel, whatever, who's bad because he doesn't care about life. So we're going to figure out how to get him out of the army. So they do a lot of groundbreaking in the first season, and then they're like, cool, these 8 ideas played really well with our test audiences, with whatever, you know, Nielsen ratings were really high those nights, so we're going to just rewrite those every season or every couple of seasons. We're going to reframe it with a new, it's Leslie Nielsen the first time, and then like it's Robert Alda the second time coming in as the doctor who knows everything. They make it work.
Yeah, or the MASH unit's effect on the countryside, or how the countryside, how the relationship between the Korean army as people and the American army as people. They're really just people fighting the war. I mean, there's a lot of repeated concepts that happen. You could almost recycle a playbook each season. It just changes because the actors changed, or because they did have some of these off-formula episodes, but even those had recycled motifs. The deer person ones are really important.
Maybe it's just a semantic thing with me, because when I think formulaic, I think the Munsters, I think Addams Family, I think Green Acres, these especially when it comes to a sitcom, formulaic to me is just, I don't even know how to describe it, but to me, MASH doesn't seem formulaic because it kept changing. I almost feel like the word I'm thinking of is MASH is thematic, because these are different themes that keep coming back to in different, I don't know, it's interesting that I totally see what you're all saying and it makes perfect sense. And yet I still can't seem to accept the word formulaic to describe this show.
Well, I think it's hybridized, Michael. I think there's aspects of the Munsters, the Addams Family, and Green Acres in MASH because they were trying to appeal to the audiences that still like those shows. But I also think it was trying to appeal. The baby boomers were teenagers and early 20s at that time. The Vietnam War was, the thing of their generation. The pandemic was Gen Zs, and, Vietnam War is the baby boomers thing. And MASH spoke to that generation on that level. So there were things where they pushed the formula, they pushed the envelope. But I still think the underlying thread, and I think it's clear today more than ever, because the sitcoms of today are their own set of formulas, but it's a different formula than what was true back then. Why are you laughing?
Can you imagine a MASH episode where there's a blood shortage because Grandpa Munster stopped by the 4077?
Crossover, they missed it.
Oh.
Weird.
There's quite a few things that I still would like to talk about for these chunk of seasons. One episode I think we should probably at least mention is the reason we get Colonel Potter and Harry Morgan as a recurring character when Henry leaves the show is because a very popular episode, I believe it might have won, if not was nominated for an Emmy, was The General Flipped at Dawn, where Harry Morgan plays a crazy general. I think he was drunk a lot, but maybe he was just crazy.
Just crazy.
Did people like that episode?
I enjoyed it. When I was watching it through this time, I was like, what? That's Colonel Potter. But it's not. But Harry Morgan was such a great actor. And he had a mile long of TV work before he got to MASH. And it's a highly enjoyable episode. It is a little bit disjointing to see him before he's actually the character that you knew him as. But it's
Especially
funny.
when you're watching them out of order and that pops up.
Well, and he's like, I think about when it came out, you've got this whole episode about how this regular army, generations of service is, I want to say worthless, but is not the bulwark of society that we would expect. Someone who can count generations and generations of military service going back to the Revolutionary War or however far back he can go. And you end up with this person who's just very small. He's power hungry and he's inconsiderate and racist and everything that could be wrong with a person, they cram it into this character who sort of represents regular military. And that had to land pretty hard in, what would that have been, 1974?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine the impact of that from 2020.
It also played out kind of weird where they, on a show that's about the military and dealing with it not lining up with the reality or people's politics, they take a character, they send them in, and it kind of seems plausible that if you had people like Hawkeye who are in the military, that they would run into people like this. So it felt awkward when at the end they're just oh, he was crazy, but And then we're just back to that other mix of these forces colliding.
I guess it fits with the things they've done in the past, where I like the one from season 1 with Leslie Nielsen is the guest star. And it's kind of the same thing. He, in theory, is good at his job, and he's not crazy, but they basically gaslight him into thinking he's crazy so they can get him out of their way. Mm-hmm. So I guess it sort of fits with their pattern, where anytime they run up against someone who is strictly regular army and doesn't sort of line up with their values, they're like, well, we are going to trick you in some way so that other saner people in the regular army are like, oh yeah, we should send him back to the U.S. to just not be involved in this anymore.
Well, I think even with it too is that, like, so I was thinking about it with that episode too. Oh my gosh, why am I blanking on the person's name? But, like, he asks Burns to salute him in an area that's pretty much like a sniper zone, and they warn him, like, no, we don't want to salute you because there's snipers here and we'll give away your rank. He's like, oh, I don't care. They do it anyway, and then they get shot at by a sniper. But it kind of got me thinking, it's like, well, they kind of know the area a little bit better. Sounds like some of these other people are just visiting it, just like for reviews or inspections, where, like, they're living there like day to day, so they kind of know more of, like, what to expect, what to do, what not to do. And I think that's more of, like, I think in a way it could also be like a safety thing too, where it's like they're not able to do their job if they're doing it like this and this.
You just mentioned them knowing the area better than the people visiting. And I feel like one of the weird things about this show is that because it's on a set, you don't really get the feeling that it is a mobile army and that they are moving constantly. They don't really know their terrain or where they are. But
that doesn't really come out until a later episode, but yeah.
Yeah.
But even when they are moving, I mean, and I assume as commentary on the Vietnam War, they make it pretty clear that, like, there's one episode where they move like a half a mile down the road and then by the end of the episode they're back. You know, so it's entirely possible that they're just moving within 3 or 4 square miles based on where the front is.
Yeah, the outdoor stuff looks an awful lot like Southern California, but what do I know?
Well, I mean, parallel-wise, it would make sense, because it would be like, what, 38th parallel DMZ, and obviously here, California is much further south.
I ain't thinking about it that closely, Jen.
I actually went to I visited South Korea, I think it was about 4 years ago. I went to visit one of my friends from college. She teaches English in Seoul right now, and so when she was there, she was like maybe 15, 20 minutes from the border. And then she could actually hear the North Korean soldiers, like, doing their drills every morning with, like, how loud they were shouting. But then they would also do, depending on the time of day and what was going on, obviously, between each country, they actually do tours of the DMZ. So you can actually, like, go into different areas with, like, the tunnels and stuff like that. And then once a year, they actually open up the border so that families from the north and the south can kind of meet with each other. But what was interesting to hear about it too is that because there are so many, like, landmines and stuff that, like, people just don't want to touch in that area for the DMZ, like, it's actually, like, unintentionally, like, a conservation area, because, like, the animals can obviously, like, sense where the mines are at, so they won't go near it, and people don't want to go in there in case they set off a landmine. Oh. The more you know.
Do.
All right, I did want to bookend our episode with the pilot. Start with the pilot. How do you feel like this pilot compared to other shows? Does it hold up? What are your thoughts?
First question I have about the pilot. Do we know if it actually aired?
I think it did.
Yeah.
Okay, because I know sometimes pilots don't air. And
did it air first?
I think it did.
Yeah.
Okay, because there's a part of me, and maybe this is a Mandela effect or something, but I almost feel like they redo that episode. Am I wrong?
Well, the show's a bit formulaic, so sometimes they pull from other.
Nick.
Yeah.
What did you do?
I have an air date of September 17th, 1972 for the pilot. So it aired first. The dates are going in order.
You know, quite honestly, I don't remember the pilot very well. I started watching this several months ago, and that's not one of the episodes that lands. So I don't know.
Well, it's the Ho-John episode where they raise money to send Ho-John to school in the States. And it's weird because Ho-John stays with the show throughout most of the first season. It's like, oh wait, I guess they didn't send him to school.
So even with it, like for the pilot, sometimes it's a few months after they shoot the pilot before they start shooting the rest of the show, because sometimes they have, because sometimes obviously like they have to present it to the network first as a pilot, and then once they get the green light, then they might be able to they'll try and film more episodes too, or like they might have to reshoot the pilot. But for all we know, it could have been like quite a few months after the pilot film versus when the second episode like started filming, and so they might have forgotten something.
Well, the notes I have in front of me say Father Mulcahy was played by somebody else. So
yes,
I don't even remember I don't remember it. I remember this plot or situation, as it were, but maybe that's because they recycled it. I don't really remember the episode.
I think they a lot are selling off a date with one of the nurses, is the way they raise money, and they cheat to make sure they end up with Mulcahy.
Got it.
And you get elements of it later in the season, like they end with where they're like, we screwed up in reverse, and then I think it's actually then the second episode they say the same line. Like I think the second or third episode they have the same situation where they are hoping that they're gonna like get arrested and sent back, or it's when Hawkeye is pretending to be like crazy, so he's hoping he's going to get to go to Tokyo for a week, and then
that's later.
The psychiatrist is like, oh well, no, I want to take you back and observation and commit you and all this stuff, and then of course casualties come in and he's like, I screwed up in reverse again. So you get like elements of it, and you have that episode where Ho-Jon steals all their stuff. And then you sort of get that same like, we'll help you, Ho-Jon, don't worry about it. Mm-hmm. So you certainly get elements of it sprinkled through the first season.
It's the one that ends with them saying the credits out loud. Like the guy's like, welcome, here's introducing the people of the...
They do that
Isn't
3
that the
times
documentary
in the first
one
season.
too?
Yeah, 3 or 4 times in the first season they do it.
Yeah, and it's not even, not a lot, but they name a couple of people who aren't ever really more than recurring and only during that season.
Like Spear Chucker disappears halfway through, or not even halfway, after 6 episodes, just gone. So G. Wood, who played General Hammond, like he was named, I think at least twice in those like spoken credits, and then just disappears and is never heard from again. So they definitely did some cast shuffling before they landed on those like 8 characters.
Spear Chucker is all the way back to the book. In fact, I think he's one of the 3 doctors that it's following. And there's a lot of contradictory things of why that character left or they stopped with. I couldn't really find the actual reason.
No, Spear Chucker's not one of the 3 doctors that's followed in the book. It's a completely different character that's played by Tom Skerritt in the movie, and that character's not in the show at all.
Yeah.
I don't remember Tom Skerritt in the movie.
Exactly. He's sort of the audience surrogate, basically.
Yeah. And Larry Gelbar is on the record as saying that the reason they cut the character is because there were no black surgeons attached with MASH units during Korea. Now, in later time, now that we're, 60 years?
50 years.
From the Korean War, like, there's information that's available that, yes, there were black surgeons, and there's some chatter about that. It was the name is pretty insensitive, the nickname Spear Chucker, obviously, because apparently Mulcahy also, they called him Dago Red in the pilot. That did not land well. So maybe they're just kind of trying to tighten some of that up for CBS censors.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Spear Chucker's in the book, and it's talked about that's his nickname is that because people were racist and he just kind of took it on and didn't let it bother him. And then in the show, I think they do mention that he throws javelin.
In the movie, he's a ringer they get him to play the football game versus the Navy. And he's a ringer because he's really very talented at football. And they bring him on so that they can, basically beat the Navy in the big climactic football game of the movie. And I think that's also in the book because the movie adapts a lot of the vignettes of the book.
Well, you think about it too, like what a lot of people don't realize is that for film and then TV, like they technically have different like guidelines and it sounds weird to say laws, but like for the FCC and also for like primetime TV, there's obviously like certain things you can and cannot say, especially like, if there happens to be like little kids watching and stuff like that. So obviously they had to censor it a little bit to some extent for TV since there was more people readily available to watch it. And even with it too, because what I thought for when the live production of Grease happened, I think in like 2016, they changed when the lyrics in Grease Lightning, and people were mad that they thought they tried to make it like politically correct and stuff. But what people didn't realize was that could have been part of it too, but also that if they said it like the normal way, like it was in the movie or the Broadway version, like they could have gotten fined because it was on primetime TV for how they phrased it.
Yeah, one of the noticeable differences if you watch the movie compared to the show is the medical scenes. And as much as they wanted the show to be medically accurate, they had to make the blood redder and a lot less blood being shown.
Yeah, but kind of related to that too, I started listening to the Scrubs Rewatch podcast, and they said, as soon as they pointed it out, kind of got me thinking, like, are there other like medical shows that you can think of like off the top of your head where they actually like wear surgical masks? Because like that wasn't very common either. Like,
but I mean, for back then, I don't know like who their consultants were and the people that were trying to make it accurate. Nowadays they have. Or maybe we just hear about it more. I don't know.
I think it's probably a mix of both. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if they had more like military and like war consultants to talk about what it was like during that time too. Just make sure, like, maybe not the fact that it's like obviously 100% accurate, but making sure like the tone and stuff was a little bit more correct than what they could depict
now and see how inaccurate it is like instantly. But back then, maybe it was more like they had to take your word for it.
There wasn't, yeah.
I've
seen those credits roll so many times. There's a medical consultant credit for every episode that I think was on set, if I remember.
Well, and even with it too, I'm kind of wondering, like, legal-wise, like, if they had to have someone like that on there to see, like, or have more disclaimers saying, like, this is fictionalized, like, don't believe everything in case, like, someone tried to do that at home or whatever, and then, like, they didn't, like, something happened, they decided to sue the TV show or something like that.
I don't know. Later in the show, they give pretty clear step-by-step directions for how to do a tracheotomy with a pen. That is definitely not recommended by anyone with a medical degree, I would assume.
Oh, jeez.
I mean, like, they take him, because he's out in a Jeep with, like, Radar or somebody, and they, like, Hawkeye talks him through over the radio, like, how to dismantle his fountain pen. It's pretty intense when you think about it, but...
Meatball surgery.
By a priest.
Yeah.
Well, they also do it Briss in season 3 over the radio.
That's no good.
Yeah, but, I mean, I would assume that, like, Hawkeye and Trapper both being in, like, regular practice had performed circumcisions previously, so...
They did, but Father Mulcahy had to obviously, like... Because he was, like, the only religious figure within, like, X amount of miles, so I think they consulted with someone from the Navy that was Jewish to, like, help with the ceremonial part of it, and then Trapper and Hawkeye actually did the circumcision part, but they had to do the religious part over the radio.
That was a good episode.
I think that scene, they cut to the battleship where the rabbi is, and it's one of the many times where they have used, like, stock war footage, which you can really see in glorious widescreen now.
That's awesome. So last episode I wanted to highlight is, I can never say the word. Sarah, you say it for me.
Abyssinia, Henry.
I'm glad I didn't have to.
Abyssinia.
There you go. Thanks, Mary.
So it's like Abyssinia.
That's not a thing. Is it? Abyssinia?
Yeah.
It's like a play. It's a play on. I'm trying to remember. It's like a play on the Korean word, but if you say it with like a Midwest American accent, it sounds like Abyssinia.
Huh.
All right.
And that's the only reason I wanted to bring up that episode. Thanks for clearing it up.
That isn't, is it?
No other reason to bring it up
sense
whatsoever.
Or work for anyone how this episode ends? Or was it just supposed to be a proper gut punch? Like, I didn't understand what was accomplished.
The gut punch.
I know.
You don't understand what was accomplished?
The gut punch was the accomplishment.
When Henry was leaving,
Yeah.
there was there's some back and forth of they killed him off because people didn't get along with him and they didn't want him to come back. But Larry Gelbart has said that a couple of them, and Alda was part of these discussions. He was the only cast member that knew before the first go at the scene they felt that they needed to do something to represent all the soldiers that didn't get to go home. That was the main reason they felt they needed to kill him off, was because plenty of soldiers didn't make it home. Alda has said that the rumor that nobody knew it was happening was when they were filming it, they told Gary Berghoff, he came out and let them know, let the rest of the characters know. In the moment, while that's technically true, they did have to film it a second time, and it's that second take that's actually on the air. But for a long time, it was just taken at face value that nobody on the cast knew that Henry was going to die at the end of that episode.
And when that episode aired, he was on then the Tonight Show that night, and so it started with like a shot of McLean Stevenson on a raft, like, I'm okay. So
I was just reading about that. Yeah, apparently, I don't know if it was. Yeah. I was just reading about that. That was one of the reactions. Yeah.
So they did like this kind of bit. He apparently was not thrilled that they killed his character off, even though he was leaving.
Yeah, it does seem like now that you made the comment, something that would be easier to do. It'd be easier to cook up in the writer's room if you didn't like them and wouldn't mind them never coming back to set.
But I have to say that is one of the episodes that sticks in my brain because it's so well done, and whether they got along with him or not, Gary Berghoff hit it out of the park in that episode.
Oh, he's so great in that episode.
He's so good, and even if McLean Stevens had this idea that he was going to come back, I don't know why he would think that. How many characters can say they had a very nice sending off where all the characters mourn their loss? Not everybody. It's better than what Trapper gets.
He literally is.
He got shafted.
Yeah.
Or even Frank Burns, you went crazy and got shipped back to the United States, like.
And a mention in like the season that he's not on. So this at least was a proper goodbye with some heft.
I do like Trappers just because it sets up so much going forward for the rest of the series. Because we see how he feels abandoned by his bestie, and then
or Hawkeye feels abandoned.
Hawkeye, yeah. Like all of a sudden you're gone, and then later the stuff with BJ, how it ends, the finale.
I mean,
it sets all that up nicely. So
Trapper's death, I do think, has some of him leaving the show.
He has a spin-off.
Not played by him.
Yes, but it does help play into the Hawkeye's final moments for the entire show. But I do think, I should know this, but I'm pretty sure both Frank and Trapper, those actors, they didn't know that it was their last season. So they just had to write something without the actor in the first episode.
Larry Linville did. Larry
Linville?
He did. It's widely reported that he didn't see where else they could go with the character. And I think his contract was up and he just didn't renew the contract. He just left. So
and Wayne Rogers didn't like playing second banana to Alan Alda.
Correct. That's also
he was
widely
like,
reported.
I'm done.
Yeah.
He was promised that they would be equal like leads, and then it just didn't pan out that way. And I kind of agree with him, but I also think like, don't you need a job? I don't know.
Well, and Alan Alda's in the writer's room and is like a producer and is directing episodes. It's got to be really hard to get equal time for your character.
Well, how much of his departure had to do with the fact that he got his own series based on the same character, Trapper John M.D.
He didn't play that.
He didn't play it.
He wasn't the actor.
Oh, it's the same character? Okay, it's the same character, not... Oh,
yeah.
right. Not the same
Same character, different actor.
Gotcha.
This isn't a visual medium, and I did the quotes for spinoff because it's the character, but it's not.
Right.
It's not.
Quite honestly...
now I'm looking that up and see it's not the same actor.
Yeah,
right.
quite honestly...
Never mind.
Yeah. Quite honestly, everybody who left MASH, who elected to leave MASH, their careers did not recover at all. They tried to spin off for Radar too, but that just didn't take Walter.
And I've been trying to figure out kind of like, is it just because it was so many people watched it, like you said earlier, Kylie, like it won the ratings basically like every week. Is it just because they became so associated with those characters, like
typecast?
Nobody could picture Larry Linville as anything but Frank Burns after that. So
probably.
I mean,
that's kind of a bummer.
He did a ton of work.
Okay.
He never, like, I'm looking at it. I mean, he did 7 episodes of Grandpa Goes to Washington. He did Chips. He did Lou Grant. Like, he did a lot of guest star stuff.
Right.
He did some stuff on the Love Boat. He just never starred, or it looks like he wasn't like a series regular in anything else.
Yeah,
Like, the
I don't-
Jeffersons.
Yeah, I don't want to say.
say.
Yeah, I don't want to say that their careers died, but their careers were. I mean, this was clearly the high point of their careers.
That's
And-
where they keep.
Yeah.
Even, I mean, Alan Alda, who has done a lot since MASH, still, like, struggled with not just being associated with MASH. I mean, he barely talks about being an actor anymore. But yeah, this show was hard to break away from.
11 seasons, that'll do. I mean,
Yeah.
any show that lasts that long, you have
Well,
that problem.
With the highest ratings and the most watched series finale of all time.
Mhm.
But can you really say that? I guess I'm thinking of, like, think of Friends. Those actors are always going to be those people to us, right?
Yeah, but they pretty much all of them, with the possible exception of, well, no, they've all had things. They've all gone on to do other things.
They totally have, but they're always going to be those characters to us.
Yeah. I think it's more like a legacy thing.
Yeah.
Because, like, I'm thinking about that right now with growing up with Harry Potter, like, after the movies, where you see, like, Emma Watson, Daniel Radcliffe, and all these other projects. Like, I mean, since I do have a background in theater, I've done theater, I'm able to distinguish, like, different characters with, like, one actor, but I know not everyone is like that. Like, I know my sister-in-law hates it when she recognizes another actor in something. She's like, no, I just want it to be like that one person playing that one role, and that's it.
Oh, no.
Well, I think Alan Alda, especially, I don't know that he helps himself either. I don't know if people know this. It's kind of a neat thing. So Alan Alda, after the show, several years later, he was having like a medical procedure, and his doctor was struggling to explain it to him. And he knew what it was, courtesy of having worked on MASH. He knew like what the medical terms were and sort of understood what they were. And so he used that as kind of this like springboard. And he does this whole, there's like I just looked it up, the Alan Alda Center for Communicating Science. So he does this whole thing where they work with like medical students and doctors to help them learn how to communicate to patients, or just research scientists to communicate like to the public in a way that's understandable. So he's sort of like, I think it was several years after the show had ended, he sort of like circled back and was like, hey, I was in MASH, I played a doctor, and being a doctor is hard. So I'm going to help work on this whole idea of communicating about science. So then
Interesting.
It gets even harder, I think, to separate when you're like, that's sort of your springboard for this whole platform, non-acting related.
Yeah, I can see that. I did know that he is focused on communication, science communication, and he has a podcast now called Clear and Vivid where he interviews different people about how they communicate in the different ways. That was his attempt of separating himself from MASH too, and even acting to some extent. Not that he stopped acting, but
He's had a lot of high-profile projects. I mean, yeah, for these actors, for Friends, this is their signature work. But Alan Alda has, I mean, he's been nominated for Academy Awards, as I recall. So,
Yep, Oscars, Tonys.
and I think his career has been more high-profile than any of the other MASH alumni.
agreed. I mean, it's hard to compare Harry Morgan. I think Harry Morgan did a lot more before MASH.
Right.
And being older.
Yeah.
I mean, MASH was Harry Morgan breaking away from Car 54. Where are you?
That's right.
And Dragnet.
And Dragnet! Do not forget Dragnet. I highly recommend the old Dragnet, by the way. It's so much fun.
Really?
It is kind of fun, yeah. It's
Now,
so
that's
cheesy.
a show I consider formulaic.
It is very formulaic, but in a cheesy 50s, 60s kind of, I don't know. And then when you watch the movie with Dan Aykroyd and Tom Hanks, it's just even funnier after you've seen the
I
original
love that
Dragnet. So, anyway,
Okay.
off topic.
We've been talking about MASH for a long time.
You're moderating!
What? I'm trying to, but you guys seem to really like this show.
What? That's shocking.
Are you criticizing the panel moderator?
Or pointing out the obvious.
Idea was to have it.
Jen gets one in.
I think we should start wrapping up. So, final thoughts, maybe on any of your favorite or least favorite side characters and or cameos that happened during seasons 1 through 3.
Well, Sidney Friedman is always one of my favorite characters whenever he shows up, and I think it lends a certain, not gravitas, that's not the word I want, but it grounds the series by having him there and be the, oh wait, it makes perfect sense that you are trying to cope with this devastating, horrible war by being, clowns. So it's always so neat to have him there and sort of ground the series in reality somewhat. So he's always one of my favorite characters. Whenever he's on the show, I just love it.
The episode Deal Me Out with John Ritter, and it also has Pat Morita in it, so I'm like, Mr. Miyagi, all right. I mean, then he went on to Happy Days, technically, but whatever. That one's a really good episode. I really enjoyed it, and I think has Sidney Freeman in it as well. I don't remember for sure, but it was really fun to see John Ritter. This is pre-Three's Company John Ritter, and that one was fun for me. I don't know that I have a favorite side character.
No.
I have a least favorite side character, which is Colonel Flagg.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Oh, yeah.
He's awful, and I'm never happy to see him, but his specific mannerism and speech pattern is very cartoonish in a way I find satisfying. So there's a little bit I like about him, too, but terrible.
He makes Frank likable, Flagg.
And I do think we get Colonel Flagg. I think there's at least an episode with Winchester and him, so he does keep coming back. I just wanted to say, to add to Michael, that Sidney Friedman is also one of my favorite recurring characters. He, I think, was a big part of the show as a whole, so much so that when they did the reunions and actors started dying off, he would be like one of the cast, even though he's really only trying to see
how many exactly he's in. I mean, he's in the final episode.
Yeah, he's in about 20, a little less than 20 episodes over 11 years, which isn't that
season.
much.
Yeah.
Which kind of shows how much he kind of does stand out. And
Loudon Wainwright was in 3 episodes.
3.
That I always did like when he was on, and I liked like having a folk song as a framing device, which is maybe a little lighter handed than some of the other framing devices. I can't remember the character's name.
neither, but that does stand out, that episode.
I really loved the Captain Casey episode, like the Catch Me If You Can episode, if you will. And up until a few weeks ago when I rewatched this, I would have sworn it was Wayne Knight.
Very similar looking, yes.
Yes, but his name is actually Alex Hentela, and that's like the only thing he did. Like, he didn't really do anything. He was just had sort of this like side actor, did a few episodes of a few things, and then like dropped off the map. But he was just fantastic in that episode, and I don't know, like at that point, you hadn't really seen anything like that before, so you just had this guy sort of bluffing his way through life, and I really appreciated the actor and the character, and just sort of that like kind of a one-off episode.
I want to say he's in Star Trek 4, but don't quote me on that.
That's for our Star Trek 50 Plus series, which is currently in progress.
And I'm going to quote you on that when we get to it. I'm quoting.
Because half this panel is on that panel.
Aluminum guy.
But
anyway.
I believe you. I don't know.
He might be. Look it up. You're staring at a computer.
That's true. But
people want to know if he's the transparent aluminum guy.
What was his name?
I don't know.
I'm Googling as fast as I can, you guys.
Oh, he was Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home.
Stop it.
I knew it.
Oh,
Michael gets the
on
star
board.
today. Nick, you
I know my
lost.
character actors.
I feel like Michael's whole life was leading to that moment, and it just happened.
Oh, that's so sad.
No,
I'm glad I
Probably
could
true.
set that up for him.
right. No. His moment will be made when we identify somebody from the motion picture, but that's a whole other thing.
Ugh, it's not gonna happen.
That terrible movie that nobody likes.
Raising my hand because I like it. But anyway.
Okay, back on track.
Running
Terry
joke.
Hart and Ron Howard. Also, we kind of almost mentioned Robert Alda. Alan Alda is in.
Real life father, yeah.
Robert Alda does come back. Robert Alda. Alda?
You were saying Alda. I think it's Alda.
It's Alda.
I did.
Yeah.
Just spoke. Yeah, 3 times. One for each season we're talking about.
Somebody's got to moderate the moderator.
I think we've established that's Sarah's job.
If I said anything and then I let it go, he would have been like, "Why didn't you tell me I was saying it, Mom?" And that's Aaron.
Dynamics.
I'm not wrong. Those of you that are married or were married, you're nodding along because that is what it is. I'm just letting people. I'm just telling you.
So what about MASH?
I don't know what to do here.
So
Okay.
speaking of Ron Howard,
Good job, Mary.
This is before Happy Days, that episode.
Yeah.
So there's that.
But after Andy Griffith.
And I think around the same time as American Graffiti.
that episode always gets me. Like
It's
when
like
he
the
walks
first
in,
series one, yeah.
when he walks into the post-op and like grabs Margaret and is like, this kid is 15 years old, put an MP on him because we're sending him home. Even I've seen the episode like 30 times and just I watched it again today and I was like, oh,
That's a great episode.
It
I
is.
like that one a lot.
I'm gonna hate you for the rest of my life. You know?
I hope it's a long life, a long hate. That's what he said.
Yeah.
Okay, in an attempt to moderate / wrap it up, how do you feel the first 3 seasons of MASH have aged? And are you looking forward to the cast change? Or are you going to miss some of that original first 3 seasons?
I have an appreciation for Henry Blake and McLean Stevenson, having watched more episodes of his. They were never these first 3 seasons were never my favorite when they were on in reruns and on whatever network they happened to be on. And I'm with Kylie, the middle section with Winchester and Honeycutt and, you know, Radar and that dynamic and everyone. I think that's when it really gels and really comes together. So I'm looking forward to that. I don't know if these episodes do hold up well, at least in the formula, I guess, if you want to call it that. The satire and I'm sorry, it's a semantic thing for me, I guess.
We have to have a hashtag
the-
for this. What is it going to be? What did you say it wasn't? Oh, thematic, not formulaic. That's the hashtag.
There we go. Thank you. Yes. Anyway, I think the satire and the pointed commentary on the Vietnam War via the Korean War, that still does well. It's anything else. Certain aspects of the show don't wage well, especially in these 3 seasons.
I disagree a little bit. I think I agree with you that the later seasons for me are better. I have an appreciation for the first 3 seasons, but the MASH that I know and love is not these 3 seasons. It's the Potter seasons. But I do think that the show generally, all 11 seasons really, but the show generally does hold up surprisingly well, because remember, I'm watching it really for the first time in a concerted, focused way. Like, this has happened in the past year for me. I was a little kid the last time I saw it, before I started watching it for this podcast, and still continue to be surprised by some of the episodes that they tackled 50 years ago, 45 years ago. So I think it does hold up pretty well. Maybe not all of it. Some of the jokes are, as Jen mentioned, they probably wouldn't land well in today's environment, but most of it holds up really well.
Anyone agree, disagree?
I would agree.
I would too. I think we see people being people in a really terrible situation. And so I think that continues to be relatable even today. Like, none of us are in war, but we all have awful things that happen in our lives and we all have our own coping mechanisms. So I think it's easy to recognize yourself in the things that happen and in the way that they deal with life and they deal with difficult people and difficult things.
Yeah, well said. Like I said at the beginning, this is one of my favorite shows. I do think it holds up and is rewatchable. I am looking forward to Potter and BJ coming in. That's when the show really starts to feel even more like the MASH that I know and love as well. So that being said, unless anyone has any last comments or things to say, speak now or wait until part 2. Anything?
Nope.
Are we going to finish this before the choppers interrupt us?
I hear fireworks in the background. Is that fireworks or is that going to be gunshots? I don't know.
What you
Maybe
should have
something's
said
happening right
is, attention, wounded coming in.
Well, you need radar looking off into the distance first before that
Oh, right.
noise senses it.
Doesn't carry well on a podcast that way, but just saying.
All right. Well, then let's kick it over to Kylie to close out MASH Part 1.
Thanks, Nick. And since we're closing out MASH Part 1, what I'd like to do is thank Josh, Sarah, Mary, Michael, Jen, and Nick for moderating MASH Part 1 today. And because we've talked about MASH Part 1, it is now time to Roll the credits! Couch Potatoes Unite! Exclamation point was produced by Back Pocket Productions, run by yours truly, the Chief Couch Potato, which is really another way of saying executively produced by me, Kylie Piette. My associate producers are Krista Pennington and Selene Rezmer. I edit this podcast, and our logo is by Rebecca Wallace. Our marketing graphic artist is Krista. Our theme song was written by Sarah Milbratz and sung by Sarah, Amy McDaniel, and Kelsey Rezmer. Kelsey played the keyboard, Ian McDonough played the bass, Christian Somerville played the guitar, and the whole kit and caboodle was engineered and produced by Kyle Aspinall and Christian. We hail from Grand Rapids, Michigan. Please, if you like what you hear, take the time to rate us on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, or Google Play, or wherever you find your podcasts. Give us stars, give us comments, give us reviews. Let us know how we're doing. Send us a message. We might just read it on the podcast. Tell us what you like, what you don't like, what we should keep, what we should toss. You know how it goes. And if you have suggestions on shows we might consider, contact us at our website, couchpotatoesunite.wordpress.com, where we have a guest book, by email at couchpotatoesunitepodcast@gmail.com, or via our social media, Facebook, Twitter at CPU Podcast, and Instagram at Couch Potatoes Unite. Though, of course, we add new and old shows to chat about around the water cooler all the time. We always have several more new episodes coming down the pike. Just listen to our intros, and if you miss old episodes or want to know in general what we cover, just find us. We are everywhere and searchable wherever you look for things on the internet. You can search for us, or you can subscribe on our website, our channels, our social media accounts. Stay up on our new events and episodes. Until the next time, all available seasons of MASH are available to stream on Hulu, which actually houses a large proportion of the 20th Century Fox library, but that's where you can find MASH. In the meantime, our MASH panel will next reconvene sometime in the near future to discuss seasons 4 through 7. As always, keep a weathered eye to Couch Potatoes Unite for all the details. In the meantime, and until next time, until next episode, new episodes are published every Wednesday. Keep listening, keep watching, stay tuned!
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.